Did I like the movie Devotion? The answer to that's going to have a few parts. It's a Drafthouse Diary for Tuesday, November 22, 2022. A lot of twos in there. And I went to see Devotion. Went to the Alamo Sloan's Lake location once again. And I've had to think about this movie for a while because I'm really not sure how I think about this movie or how I'm responding to it. So even though I talk about different aspects of a movie as I discuss it, I really had to break this down and think about what I thought of each different part that makes up this movie. Not just narrative parts like acts, but all the different pieces of the movie itself. So I'm going to break it down that way. And I'm going to start with the easiest one to talk about because it's really what got me in the theater for this movie. It's what I saw in the trailers that really grabbed me. And that is the way this movie looked. The cinematography and specifically the aerial cinematography. Well, let me back up. Devotion is directed by J.D. Dillard. It stars Jonathan Major and Glen Powell. This movie is set in 1950. And Jonathan Major plays Ensign Jesse Brown, who was the first African-American U.S. Navy fighter pilot. And Glen Powell plays Lieutenant Tom Hudner, who's another fighter pilot and is Jesse Brown's wingman. So it's about Navy fighter pilots at the beginning of the Korean War. And as quickly as the movie possibly can, they get us into the sky. They introduce a couple of characters just so we have some idea as to who these people are, and then we see them flying. And the flying scenes are brilliant and beautifully done, especially that first sequence. At the beginning of the movie, these pilots are in training. So we see them in this almost painfully bright blue sky over a sparkling Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Rhode Island. Well shot, interesting maneuvers that we see these planes going through. If you're a plane fan, this is definitely a can't miss movie. I actually, when I was younger, I worked briefly for the company that made Navy fighters. So I have kind of a fondness for this lineage of aircraft. And the movie starts out, we're seeing them flying Grumman Bearcats. Later on, they move up to Corsairs, which are bigger, more powerful, harder to fly, more dangerous to fly. And that is a factor in the movie. And so if you like planes, if you like flying, if you just like interesting action cinematography, it's a beautiful movie and worth seeing for that. It's definitely worth recognizing the cinematographer here, Eric Messerschmidt, who is known for some of his collaborations with David Fincher, including Mank, for which Messerschmidt won an Oscar. He's also done a lot of TV work, a lot of interesting prestige TV series. So between Messerschmidt as the cinematographer and J.D. Dillard as the director of this, they gave us some beautiful aerial cinematography. And it's worth noting also that the flying sequences that we see throughout this movie, they're not just decoration because they and their nature of these scenes follows the career of these pilots and the whole squadron that we are following. As the Korean War heats up and as these guys go from the kind of make-work training that they felt like they were doing at the beginning of the movie, since they all missed their chance to fight in World War II, which had ended just 5 years earlier, to now having to really be combat pilots. We see it go from the beautiful, bright, almost fun scenes of, well, never mind almost, the fun scenes of their training, to the more harrowing scenes of them qualifying for carrier landings and training at sea to do their jobs, seeing them then in combat missions over Korea, tactical and strategic support. Later on, we see them providing air support to Marines who are pinned down in a messy, ugly, chaotic battlefield, and we see these pilots flying over that kind of situation. we see the nature of their flying and the way that these scenes are shot evolve over the course of the movie. So it really does contribute to the story in that way. Let's talk also about the performances. Jonathan Majors stars as Ensign Jesse Brown, and it's a terrific performance. I think Major is great. I saw him, I really know him from the HBO adaptation of Lovecraft Country, in which he starred. And that's a really good, by the way, and the book is even better. If you haven't read Lovecraft Country by Matt Ruff, you should. And we've seen Jonathan Major show up as Kang in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and we'll be seeing more of him according to the trailers of Quantum Mania. And in this, he's playing, it's a very emotional performance, but it's a very interior and a very closed-off performance in ways that make sense for the character, but I'll talk a little bit later about what that means for the story. Glen Powell, playing Lieutenant Hudner, I know him from his small supporting role as John Glenn in the movie Hidden Figures. I thought he was really good as Glenn in that movie. And it's not a huge jump to see him now as a naval officer and a fighter pilot. It's a really good performance. This is a solid two-hander, 2 stars, sharing the screen and delivering really compelling performances. They're also backed up by a really good supporting cast. There's a lot of those that I could mention. I do specifically want to call out Thomas Sadowski as Dick Savoli, the commanding officer of these pilots. He does a great job of creating a tough but sympathetic stand-up guy as a leader of men, by understanding them, by being firm as a leader, but also having a sense of what they're going through, and being in the thick of it himself. So we've got a beautiful cinematography. Oh, and the cinematography is not beautiful just in terms of the aerial cinematography. The whole movie is shot very, very well. It really makes the most of these performances that we're seeing. It gives you a real good sense of place. It gives you a sense of time, too, and that's something that it's hard to define exactly how movies can do this, but the consistency of the way that everything is shot, and just something about the style, it makes it clear that this is happening somewhere in that early 1950s, mid-century time period. Not by looking like a movie that was shot in 1950, but by somehow giving you a sense that this is happening in 1950. The time and place cards that we see throughout the movie make that clear, but it all fits with the feel and the style of the way the movie is shot. So let's talk now about the story. This is where I have more trouble talking about this movie, because I've talked before about how I like biopics, and I like biopics, good standard Hollywood-style biopics. Partly, one of the things that makes those movies that I like is that a lot of biopics, they're not afraid to change what's happening for the sake of building a story. The movie does not exist to recreate and document every true instance of the time period and the life that they're talking about, but they use the story of a person's life as the basis for creating an engaging and compelling story. You can argue whether that's a good thing to do or not, to treat it first and foremost as a movie and secondarily as telling the story of a person. And I think it also matters what that person did, how long ago that person lived, and so on. Judging them purely as movies, the willingness to develop the story from the source material can make for a better movie. In this movie, I feel like they didn't do that, and I can absolutely understand why the writer and the director might have decided to stick very close to the truth, assuming they did. I haven't done any research to see if they have, if they've diverted from the true events of Jesse Brown's life or not. But the movie, as a movie, had the sense of something that felt very constrained. And there's a lot that is suggested in this movie that we never get a chance to see. We hear about all of the challenges we hear about the fact that Ensign Brown had these challenges to overcome in just to get where he is, to join the Navy, to become a pilot, to become a fighter pilot in this group, and the challenges he has to overcome to stay there. But we don't see very much of that. We don't see as much of it as we hear him talking about it. And as important as it is to hear this character, to hear Jonathan Major gives voice to this character in talking about this, it would be more powerful if we got to see some of this. I wouldn't have minded if this movie chose to start earlier and let us see something about the rest of Brown's career. What was it like joining the Navy when he did as an African American? What were those challenges? How did he overcome them? We get glimpses of that in terms of how he's responded to it in the time, in the 1950 time frame when the movie takes place. But it would have been interesting to see that happen, to see this character deal with that. Another thing that kind of keeps the movie very reserved when it comes to story, Jonathan Major can be a very internal actor. There's a lot going on, and with subtle expressions, and you can kind of feel this energy that's building in this character, and only a portion of that gets to the surface. And what gets to the surface, what we get to see, is incredible. But we always get the sense that there's more going on. And that can be great, but I would have liked to have seen what was going on maybe a little more in this movie. A lot of what we see of Ensign Brown, a lot of what we learn about him, a lot of what we get to understand about him, seems to be coming through the eyes of Lieutenant Hudner. And that brings up another, I think, flaw in the storytelling of this movie. And that is that Lieutenant Hudner, Ensign Brown's wingman, is very much in the center of this movie. And yeah, it's a buddy movie. It's a movie about these two men, the way they relate to one another, the way they learn about one another. But the whole structure of the movie, literally beginning to end, focuses on Hudner. The movie literally begins when Lieutenant Hudner shows up in Rhode Island, having transferred from Pearl. The movie ends with a scene involving Hudner. And so much of what we do learn about the challenges that Ensign Brown overcame, the difficulties that he's dealing with even day to day, now that he is a fighter pilot, are based upon what he tells Hudner. And there's that, as with too many movies, there's that sense of the story is what Hudner has to learn, as opposed to the story being what Ensign Brown had to go through. And I think that weakens the movie. It fails to put Jesse Brown's story front and center. I would have liked more of this story to be more directly, solidly from Jesse Brown. And maybe that would have required a little bit less of a closed-off, internalized character than portrayed. And maybe Jonathan Major was portraying Jesse Brown very true to life. Maybe that's what Jesse Brown was like. He was very, very private, very closed. And we do get to see him open up a bit. Some terrific scenes of Jesse Brown at home with his wife, Daisy Brown, played by Christina Jackson. Really good performance there as well. And it is interesting to see that contrast between the way Brown behaves at work and the way he is at home. But I would have liked to have seen more of that directly. We hear him just talk about, he's like teaching Hudner about the fact that, as one line in the movie puts it, a slap on your wrist is not the same as a slap on mine. Any negative marks in Ensign Brown's file, they can cost him a promotion or the rest of his career. Not the same for a white Annapolis graduate like Lieutenant Hudner. Yeah, it's interesting to hear him explain that. But again, it kind of makes Hudner's need to learn that lesson the important part. I don't think that's really the important part. Taking individual scenes separately, I do think that if you think of this as a series of vignettes, each individual sequence extremely well done, extremely engaging, extremely compelling. The only places where that weakens a bit are where they involve, there's a kind of a cartoonishly racist U.S. Marine who is being transported on the same carrier where they're based and where they are headed to Korea. And yeah, it is very cartoony. It's very, it seems very forced, and it's almost as if it was just put in as an afterthought. And there again, here's a character, this Marine, who obviously, disrespects Ensign Brown because of his race. Late in the movie, Brown and the rest of the pilots we've been following are providing air support to help essentially rescue these Marines who are pinned down. And this Marine who had it in for Brown all along sees Jesse flying one of the planes that are giving them this much needed air support. It's like this thing that Brown is accomplishing is conveyed through what someone else learns from it, which may be valid, but I don't know that it needs to be the focus of the movie as much as it is. But really great vignettes, really great scenes. It adds up to less than the sum of its parts, which is disappointing because so much was done so well. I still give this a solid 2. I recommend it. It's good viewing, especially if you like planes and aerial cinematography. If you like war movies, if you like biopics, it's worth seeing. Other parts of my visit to the Alamo, not a whole lot to talk about. For food, I got the Royale with cheese. That's their basic bacon cheeseburger. It's a solid go-to. I've never been disappointed by it. I think that's all I had, just that and a glass of water. So yeah, that was good. And didn't have a whole lot of interaction with the staff. One of the nice things about the system, if you've got your ticket on your phone, you just walk into the theater, take your seat, you deal with the server to get your food, but really that's all that's necessary. But given that, they're always very friendly, always very efficient, and this was no exception. All in all, this added up to a really great visit. Even though the movie is not one that I liked 100%, it had me thinking for quite a while, and that's important. And it taught me some things about this history of these people and this time that I didn't know. And on top of that, it was a good visit to a fun movie theater. Well, thanks very much for watching. If you've watched this far and you've enjoyed the video, please click the like button down below because that makes it easier for other people to find this video. Most importantly, thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. Until next time, enjoy your movies, and when you do, stay till the end of the credits.